students, the work you just heard is the first movement, or part of the first movement from Antonin Dvorak's Symphony Number 9, nicknamed the New World Symphony. That was conducted by composer Marin Alsop. She is conducting there the Peabody Symphony Orchestra, and Peabody is the conservatory that's attached to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Marin Alsop is famous in the United States. She was the first woman to achieve the position of music director, conductor of a major symphony orchestra in the United States, and she's fabulous to watch. We watch now music by Dvorak, his Ninth Symphony. He had this call to arms of American composers, and he says in 1893, "The future of music in this country must be founded upon what are called the Negro melodies. The gems lie hidden among all the races that are commingled in this country." Now, Negro is an older term that they would use in the 1800s to describe the African American community. So Dvorak, though, saying this, was a Czech composer from Bohemia, and that's where a lot of his music was from in Europe. And he was heavily influenced by Czech and Eastern European folk music. In 1892, he famously arrived in New York to lead the National Conservatory of Music. And the president, or the owner of this conservatory, challenged him to encourage American music from composers, whatever that might be. So his job was to come to the United States and teach students what the new American sound would be. And he was really surprised to know that American music, meaning classical music written by American composers, really was very European sounded. It sounded exactly like Brahms's music. There was no American style. So he decided that it was African American melodies that would be pushing American music. So he had this call to arms, meaning all composers, I challenge you, I call you to write music based on African American spirituals. And later that year in December, he created and published and performed the New World Symphony. Dvorak, hired an assistant. It was a student of his at the National Conservatory named Harry Burleigh. And so Harry Burleigh was an African-American student. Part of the reason that Dvorak chose Harry was because he was African-American, and Harry introduced him to spirituals, African-American sort of songs that came out of slavery, and songs that have their roots in African ancestry, but they're Christian. So he even says, Harry Burleigh does, that you could technically hear, sort of, Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot, the famous African-American spiritual, in the flute section, here in one moment of the New World Symphony, first movement. Dvorak's music, he kind of puts his money where his mouth is, so to speak. He writes in the second movement called Going Home, is what we kind of now call it. He wrote this solo for English horn. And many people think that it sounds like an African-American spiritual, or that Dvorak took a spiritual and added it to his symphony, but it's actually the other way around. He wrote a piece of music that sounded so much like a spiritual that it actually becomes part of a hymnal staple, meaning that you may have heard this music before, either in a church setting or in a hymnal. Enter Amy Beach, who is an American composer, the first American woman to be publishing a symphony in the United States. And she answers with the second movement here called Alla Siciliana. You notice a lot of musical similarities to Dvorak's movement. So Amy Beach would have heard the New World Symphony. She would have studied Dvorak. She would have studied this music in Boston, and she writes in response to this. So that movement, you can clearly tell, has the English horn solo, although it's in a different meter. It very much reminds us of the New World Symphony, and so many people, particularly after 1996, in the 1990s actually, there's been a resurgence of Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony. Historians and musicologists have sort of placed her music after the New World Symphony, like she was heavily influenced by it. She was born in 1867, so she lived around the time of, slightly after, Antonin Dvorak, and would have heard his music again. The Gaelic Symphony was written in 1896, so this is about 3 years after the New World Symphony. So this was the first symphony, like I told you, published and performed by an American woman. The music, though, doesn't explore African American spirituals. It explores Irishness in like the Boston part of the United States, or the civilization of Ireland and England and Wales, and even the civilization of the Italian influences and the Polish influences. Amy Beach sort of mentions that it's not really African American music that forms American music. It's all music of immigrants. She also believes, as she wrote, that the New World Symphony, Dvorak's symphony, sort of made light of slavery, meaning that African American music, if it was properly portrayed in the New World Symphony, was too happy. She says, "It seems light to me in caliber, and to respect only the peaceful, sunny side of the Negro character in life. Not for a moment does it suggest their sufferings, their heartbreaks, and their slavery. It is all active, bright, and cheery and domestic. The slow movement, especially suggesting the home life to me." That was the going home that we played first with the English horn. "With the baby being sung to sleep. From this point of view, it is admirable, but there is a much more that might have been added of the dark, tragic side." Amy Beach is saying that the New World Symphony is sort of just too happy in order to fully encapsulate the African American experience. Amy Beach's music uses Irish folk songs, like this one, "The Little Field of Barley," which reminds us exactly of the melody of the English horn and the Alla Siciliana movement of the Gaelic Symphony. I dreamed, my love, of thee in the first sweet sleep of night. If you pardon my poor singing there for a moment, it does remind you of the English horn solo. But her music is not just Irish, it's influenced heavily by this violin concerto by Camille Saint-Saëns. Camille Saint-Saëns being a French composer. So modern musicologists notice that Amy Beach's music is similar to Antonin Dvorak, but not just that. So her music is very much more global. And despite the fact that it's called the Gaelic Symphony, referring to Ireland, um, we position her music now in historiography as sort of being for all immigrants and perhaps more representative of the U.S. thinking, the immigration world, the idea that the United States is a melting pot. So the two pieces we've studied here are Antonin Dvorak's Symphony Number 9. We call it the New World Symphony, or sometimes it's called From the New World. That's partly because he used what he considered to be African-American music themes in his symphony, which was going to be the new style of American music. Amy Beach answers 3 years later with the Gaelic Symphony, music that is for all immigrants, but suggests a lot of themes influenced by French themes too, but suggests a lot of themes from Irishness. We leave you now with the final moments of Amy Beach's Third Symphony, the Gaelic Symphony. This is an excerpt from the very end of her fourth movement.